I got word from home that a postcard arrived for my middle school reunion. It's been 15 years since we graduated. There are probably some who look back on our junior high days with nostalgia. I wonder what kind of man my first love has become. Is my close girlfriend from back then married? Still, the word reunion holds no allure for me. I attended public schools through elementary and middle school, but I wonder if there's anyone who, when reminiscing about our classmates, would remember me. I always spent my breaks reading alone. The person I got along with best at school was the librarian. I was the only one whose library card was worn thin from so much use. Thanks to a teacher's idea to award someone in the class once a year, I got the most books read in class award once. That was fine until elementary school. But once we entered middle school, the so-called party girls began to claim the top of the class's social hierarchy. And me, being at the opposite end of that spectrum, was barely hanging on at the bottom. Even among them, there was a girl, Maureen, who picked on me all the time.
Hey, I thought it was a joke when they said humans evolved from monkeys, but looking at Sizzy, I totally get it.
As Maureen passed by me reading during lunch break, the boys and girls in class turned their heads. Pointing at my arm in the summer, clad in a short-sleeved gym uniform, Maureen laughed.
Wow, the hairs on your arm are so long. Gross. You're a girl. If you don't get rid of that, everybody is going to avoid you.
I couldn't say anything back, and just pretended to continue reading my book while my face turned red. I've always had a lot of body hair. It didn't bother me until elementary school, but gradually people started to care about their appearance, and I began to hear about shaving and hair removal. I've asked my mother several times to let me do it, but she was adamant that there was no need for hair removal. I tried to shave in secret, but because I have sensitive skin, I ended up with razor burn, turned bright red, and ended up getting scolded when my mom found out I'd shaved. My nickname became Gorilla Sizzy when Maureen made fun of the hair on my arms. Even now, recalling the worst event that makes me feel awful was the bullying during pole class.
Ew, your back is so gross. Your hair is all swirly.
I instinctively covered my back with a bath towel and fled to the back of the class. But then the gym teacher who came in yelled at me, "What are you doing with a towel on? Are you planning to swim or not?" I was on the verge of tears. There were kids who looked at me with pity, but there was no one who dared to stand up to Maureen. They were probably afraid of becoming her next target.
You're going to the reunion, right?
I really don't want to go if I can help it.
But isn't it unavoidable this time?
That's the case. This time, not going isn't really an option. It's because my homeroom teacher, Mr. Smith, passed away. He was the only person who cared about me when I was in middle school. We had planned to meet at the teacher's house during our summer holiday, and from there, everyone would gather together. Even after graduating middle school, I still kept in touch with the teacher, and the teacher's wife remembered me and wanted to see me. So I'm part of the group that's going to visit the teacher's house. Therefore, it would be hard to say I won't be attending the subsequent reunion. Until the day of the reunion, I was living in gloom. But I was indeed happy to see the teacher's wife, and hearing that the teacher had talked about me to her made me feel like my time as a student, which I thought was a dark past, was redeemed a bit. The reunion was to be held at a local restaurant run by a classmate who took over his father's business. When we left the teacher's house and stepped in the restaurant, many people had already gathered. I felt like I was immediately reverting back to my old self. My eyes were automatically searching for Maureen. Maureen was sitting at the top seat, dressed in clothes highly exposing her body. And she was waving big to the boy who had been class president, sitting next to me.
Over here, over here. Let's toast. Sit down quickly.
It seemed like she still thinks she's the one to control the class, making the members who came from the teacher's house sit at the table. In that case, I also had to sit at the table where Maureen was.
All right. Everyone got their beer glasses.
Maureen stood up with a glass of beer in her hand.
I am very happy to be able to gather with everyone from our class today. Nostalgia is a good feeling. It is unfortunate that our beloved teacher, Mr. Smith, has passed away, but I believe that the teacher has given us this opportunity to gather all together. Let us pray for the teacher's soul and express our gratitude for being able to meet again. Cheers.
Everyone followed Maureen and said cheers. After that, everyone was chatting while enjoying their meals and sharing their current situation. Next to me was Emma, one of the members who went to the teacher's house with me. Emma was a beautiful girl with fair skin, but she was quiet and I didn't talk much with her. I didn't really interact with you, Emma, when we were in middle school.
Yeah. When we become adults, we don't know why, but being in middle school felt like being bound by invisible rules. It was hard.
Haha, I thought so too. I was so scared that I felt like I didn't even have the right to speak.
When I was told to speak, my chest would tighten and I didn't know when to breathe.
We laughed as we remembered how we used to rush back to our seats after speaking in a small voice in one breath during class presentations. That's right, we're no longer children in our teens. We are already in our 30s and are grown-ups. While talking to Emma about what happened from the time we graduated from middle school to now, I was enjoying the food being served. But there was someone standing behind us.
Oh my, is that you, Susie?
I could feel my heart, which had completely let its guard down, tighten up instantly. Long time no see, Maureen.
Oh wow, you can actually speak now. Back in middle school, you always hid behind your books, and even when I tried to talk to you, you would just ignore me.
At these words, several people laughed as if recalling the past. Alcohol affected everybody, of course. I knew they weren't laughing out of malicious intent, but it didn't make me feel any better. I didn't mean to ignore you, but I was really timid back then. So if I made you feel bad, Maureen, I'm sorry. At that, Emma gave me a look that said good for you for saying that, and she smiled at me. But it seemed to work, Maureen.
You've become so assertive, huh? What happened? Did you find some hotshot guy after leaving our hometown who gave you a sense of superiority?
The idea that a man was an element to elevate oneself surprised me. Not really.
Thought so. You still look like a spinster. Never had a boyfriend, have you? You don't even know the joy of being loved by a man. Po thing.
We had grown up, but it seemed Maureen hadn't. Her crude way of steering the conversation, which made the surrounding men start boasting about their past experiences, deeply disgusted me.
So Susie is still a worthless human being even after growing up.
I felt a mix of pity and frustration at Maureen, who was laughing uproariously with a beer in hand. Maureen, a person's value isn't determined by such things. Are you saying that sleeping with men increases your status? At my words, the smile disappeared from Maureen's face.
What's a woman who's never been touched by a man doing, giving us lectures?
The value of a woman isn't determined by men. We ourselves determine our value. A value that needs to be determined by others can collapse at any time. That's when it happened. Maureen poured the beer she was holding over my head.
Thank you for your precious words. Let me express my gratitude by pouring this beer over you, Susie. It's a beer tower, not a champagne tower.
The venue became silent at her behavior, and critical looks were directed at Maureen.
Hey, that's not cool.
Could someone get a towel, please?
Just then, I received a call on my cell phone, and I answered it with beer dripping from my head. Emma, who was next to me, was wiping the beer off my hair with a towel. Yes, emergency consultation request, understood. I'll be there immediately. The car is already in front of the restaurant. After I hung up the phone, I stood up without saying a word. Everyone, I'm sorry for the trouble. I just got an emergency work call, so I have to leave now.
But your clothes are soaked in beer.
Just then, my staff member, who had already arrived to pick me up, opened the restaurant door and appeared.
Dr. Johnson, I apologize for disturbing you during your fun time.
I handed out a business card to Emma and Maureen. I'm the director of my own mental clinic. If you ever have anything weighing on your mind, please feel free to consult me.
You're a doctor?
Of the mind, yes. I smiled at Emma, then turned back to Maureen, who was staring at the business card in surprise. I have a husband now. He's a doctor, too, but I don't consider that a victory. I believe my value lies in my ability to be told thank you by my patients and friends, and having the knowledge and a considerate heart to offer. Beyond the door that the staff member had opened for me, I could see my husband's car. As you might expect, the sight of it made the men's eyes light up, exclaiming, BMW.
He said he was coming to pick you up. so I went against Dr. Johnson's orders not to come in a flashy car.
My husband leaning out from the car window and waving at us. I turned back to face Maureen once more, placing a hand on her shoulder. Your worth isn't determined by a man. Even if you get divorced, it won't hurt you. Don't be swayed by the word divorcee.
I never said I was.
I pointed to the ring finger on my left hand. On Maureen's left ring finger was the white tan line of a ring she'd taken off. When you face a divorce, you'll say and hear cruel words you've never thought you'd hear hurled at you, and it hurts. But don't believe those malicious words and think you're worthless. The moment I said that, Maureen's face, which had been strong until now, crumpled, and she began to cry out. I hated the me who was still affected by the bullying I experienced as a child, and I wanted to learn how to heal people's hearts, so I became a psychiatrist. And as I learned about people's psychology, I realized that it's people who enjoy belittling people like Maureen who have scars on their hearts. Maureen, call me anytime. As I stood up to leave the restaurant, Maureen looked up at me with a face soaked with tears and snot.
Susie, I'm so sorry for everything. I really am sorry.
I nodded with a smile and left the restaurant. Later, it seemed Maureen was comforted by her classmates and somehow managed to get through the ordeal of the divorce. And later, I was visited for a consultation by a child who had lost his father and become neurotic. If you ask me if the reunion was fun, it was the worst. But I was able to break my past curse, and I was also able to break the curse Maureen was carrying. So it was a good reunion. I want to continue to be a person who helps those in distress.
When I was 13 years old, my dad passed away from cancer. Though my mother has been a homemaker all the time because she was fragile ever since she was born, she had to start part-time job to support our family. I got permission from school and started a part-time job as a paper deliverer to help her. However, my mother is getting sick and being in and out of the hospital now. It's because she was juggling multiple jobs and overworked herself too much. As I turned 15 years old, I had a conversation with my homeroom teacher, Mr. Peterson, about my future.
Is there really no way for you to pursue higher education? You know there's a thing like student loan, right?
Mr. Peterson lamented and said that, if I don't work, my mother will overwork herself. I would rather get a job than pursue higher education.
That's a shame. With your grades, you could easily get into top schools.
I appreciated his words, and I actually loved studying either. Ever since I was a kid, I was interested in the human body and dreamed like, I will be the doctor in the future. However, reality was too harsh. Afterward, Mr. Peterson desperately searched for the place of employment for me, but it was nearly impossible to find a company that would hire a middle school graduate as a full-time employee in this day and age. After graduation, I ended up juggling multiple part-time jobs. While continuing my paper delivery job, I worked at a diner during the day and at a gas station at night. I didn't spare time even for sleep to work. However, I faced prejudice only because I didn't have a high school diploma and became a target of petty bullying.
Who the heck messed up the change?
The manager doing the mid-shift cash register reconciliation at the diner yelled out irritably.
Well, there's only one person who can't even do subtraction.
All eyes immediately turned to me.
Johnson, be more careful.
What? No, it was not me.
Don't talk back. Why don't you just go home and do some exercises for elementary school, huh?
The other staff members giggle with his words.
Practice multiplication while you take the bath.
Oh, come on. He can't even do subtraction. Multiplication is beyond impossible.
The laughter grew louder. I clenched my fists tightly and endured it. It wasn't as if this place was exceptionally terrible. During my late-night shifts at the gas station, they did explain to me the meaning of every single word in the work manual. They even harassed me like that. These incidents led me to job hop from one part-time job to another. I know my patience is not enough. But being mocked every day by those clearly less competent than me, only because I didn't go to high school, was more than I could bear. The only one job I continued was that paper delivery job. The elderly couple who ran the newspaper stand were really nice, and they always cared about me since I started working for them in middle school. That lady always made handmade sandwiches for me when I came to pick up the morning papers. Of course, I was grateful and happy, but a major reason why I continued this job was because Professor Harris from NYU ordered the evening paper delivery. It was kind of weird delivering newspaper to professor's office in the university, but it was happy more than anything for me. I had never met Professor Harris who ordered newspaper, but just being able to step foot in a university without hesitation was like a miracle to me. It's a renowned university with a medical faculty, where lectures are given in various classrooms. Due to the season, all the windows and doors were left open, allowing me to discreetly watch any lecture. Among them, there was one professor whose lectures I really liked and really easy to understand even for a novice like me. Every time I delivered the evening paper, sneaking peeks into classrooms was the only thing that gave me a reason to live. I would spend my time like this until the very last moment before my night shift starts, then quickly hop on my bicycle. Most of the students walking around campus were wearing a lab coat, and they all have a hopeful look. It was so bright and made me feel sad at the same time. But there was nothing I could do about reality. All I could do now was go into the library with the knowledge I secretly got and relearn it until I was satisfied. I knew it was just for my own satisfaction, but if I didn't at least try to improve myself by expanding knowledge, I was afraid I would truly become the trash like I was treated by them. Then one day, something happened. While on my way back to the newspaper stand after morning delivery, I heard a small child crying. Looked around to see what it was, and then I found a girl who is about 3 years old. She was standing just before the crosswalk and crying like, "Mom, Mom." As I approached, I could see a woman, heavily pregnant, panting and sitting on the sidewalk, appearing to be in discomfort. I contemplated going over to help, but the thought of my plans afterward left me unsure. I was due to start my new part-time job today. I didn't want to know what they would say if I was late even on the first day. There were plenty of people around that woman. Someone will step in, right? That's what I thought as I was about to walk away. But I stopped in my tracks when I heard a little girl screaming, "Mommy's going to die." The people around her look like they feel bad about it, yet nobody paused to help. It was the peak of the morning rush hour, after all. Everyone must be thinking the same as me. Damn it, what am I doing? I blamed myself internally, stopping my bike and approaching that woman. "Hey, are you okay? Are you feeling unwell?"
Yes, it feels like my head is splitting.
She managed to say that, and then she's bowing her head and covering her mouth with a towel. A headache. If I remember correctly, I've read somewhere that the woman who is pregnant can have headaches due to a sudden rise in blood pressure. I quickly looked at the woman's feet. Thankfully, there was no blood.
Could you call a taxi for me?
A taxi?
Yes. I need to go to my regular op/GYN.
I don't think that's a good idea. If you have a headache from a sudden increase in blood pressure, it's a dangerous situation for both of you and the baby. I'll call an ambulance immediately. I took out my phone.
But my water hasn't broken yet. It's not an emergency. Not good to call an ambulance,
she said, gasping for breath. The little girl who was crying nearby asked me, "Is Mommy okay?" "Mommy's not going to die, is she?" "It's all right. We're going to see a doctor right away." "Okay, what's your name?" I asked as gently and calmly as I could.
"Sophie? Sophie Harris."
"Okay, Sophie. I'm going to call the ambulance. Can you place this under your mom's bottom?" I told her like that and took off my jacket. The woman started to say something, but I shook my head. Sophie took my jacket. I quickly dialed 911 and told them the address on a nearby pole. They're coming right away. Don't move, just stay as you are and lean on me, okay? I gently tilted her body towards me, trying to make her as comfortable as possible. Then, one woman said, "Here, you can use this if you want." She draped a blanket over her belly. "Oh, thank you so much." I was happy and I smiled at that woman without thinking. It is because I was so frustrated with everyone ignoring this situation. She was wearing a high school uniform.
It's fine. It's just something I was using during class. It's pretty worn out. You can just throw it away after this.
After saying that, this girl was going to leave, but she stopped, turned back and said, "You know, you're amazing. I feel kind of ashamed of myself." Then she left with a small smile. I was taken aback by her sudden words, but I was happy. Then, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. I got into the ambulance together when it arrived, and I held Sophie's hand the entire way. When we arrived at the hospital, that woman was taken to the treatment room. A nurse asked me, "Are you a family member?" And I replied, "No, I was just passing by." Then Sophie shouted, "This man helped my mom."
That's right. You're in good hands with this kind gentleman here. Now, let me contact your father.
Then Sophie shaking her head and replied, "Daddy is working far away. That's why I'm always with my grandpa." The nurse nodded and turned to me. "The woman is Ms. Mackenzie Harris. I'll try to contact her father. I'm sorry to ask this, but could you take care of Sophie until then? The part-time job came into my head, but it's already late anyway." I nodded in agreement, sure. So I waited for her father to come down here. I wondered if she was okay. Though worried, there was nothing more I could do. I tried to distract Sophie with some small talk while we waited for the treatment of her to finish. "Excuse me, are you the one who helped my daughter?" Looking in the direction of the voice, I saw a man who is wearing suits and about like 50s.
Grandpa.
Sophie exclaimed and ran to that man. He caught her in a comforting embrace, then turned to me and bowing his head.
"Thank you so much. You calling the ambulance probably saved her life."
Looking at me, the man seemed to recognize me.
"Wait a second,"
he said, with a puzzled expression. I also felt like I had seen him somewhere before, so I looked at his face.
"She is out of danger now. I just spoke to Miss Mackenzie. She told me that you responded very effectively. Are you by any chance a medical student?"
I blushed at his question. "No, not at all. I just read some books, that's all. I didn't even graduate from high school and work part-time jobs." Then that man sat next to me and smiling.
"Don't be so modest. I have no students who listen to my lectures as attentively as you do. You are truly a med student."
Upon hearing this, I exclaimed, "Oh, this man was the professor who gave the lectures I always secretly listened to." Did you know I was listening? That's embarrassing. I couldn't raise my head. I worried that he thought my knowledge was childish.
"I didn't notice. A student as enthusiastic as you is rare these days. I was deeply moved. I thought you were a student from another school."
I'm sorry. I'm just a part-time worker. I haven't even been to high school.
Would you mind telling me the reason why? I can't imagine you didn't further your education because you dislike learning.
I explained to him everything that had happened until now. Sophie, she is completely relaxed now and was dozing on the professor's lap. Nodding several times during my story, the professor remarked with apparent admiration.
"So, it's thanks to the evening paper what I ordered that we could meet with an interesting coincidence."
Yes, I didn't know that the professor whose lectures I loved to listen to was the same Professor Harris to whom I delivered the evening paper. At this, Professor Harris nodded. At that moment, the treatment room's door opened and the nurse said, "The procedure is over. Please come in." I stood up and said, "All right, I leave now. I'm truly glad that both Ms. Mackenzie and the baby are safe." holding my hand, and Professor Harris said thank you. We'll speak about my gratitude later, and walked into the treatment room. Sophie kept turning around and waving at me. As expected, I lost my job on the first day. But I felt satisfaction from the bottom of my heart. The next day I went to deliver the evening paper to the professor's office as usual. Professor Harris was seated and waiting for me.
Today, I thought you might take a test. It's a simple test of 3 subjects. Would you be up for it?
He handed me 3 printed sheets. I was surprised, but also I was interested in it. So I took a seat and tell him I would love to. The questions were on 3 subjects: English, math, and national language. At a glance, it looked like a middle school level test. When he asked me how long it would take, I replied, "An hour is enough." He satisfied with my answer and left the room. It had been a while since I had taken a test last time. I felt a rush of nostalgia and happiness, and I finished the test in no time. I had always loved the middle school textbooks and read them again and again every day. The professor came back and graded my paper.
All perfect scores. Impressive.
I felt a bit shy as he expressed his surprise. Well, they were just middle school questions.
Indeed, they are primarily middle school level, but they are actually part of this year's GED test.
GED?
Yeah, it might be more familiar if I call it the exam for getting qualification to take university entrance exams. It's the exam for folks who haven't finished high school, but still want to apply for college.
Oh, even so, what was this all about? I must have had a wondering look on my face. The professor chuckled heartily.
My apologies. I skipped ahead with my explanation, but I needed to know your academic level before I could propose anything. Sorry for testing you without any context.
No problem, sir. So, what's the proposal?
Yes, Johnson. Would you consider working with me, studying for your GED and applying to medical school?
Suddenly proposed, I was left speechless.
The job is miscellaneous work, but you can read any of the books here and I'll make sure you get access to the university library too. I'll pay you 3 times more what you're making at your current part-time job, so I'd like you to quit and focus on your studies. And of course, I'll be the one teaching you. What do you think about it?
Even when asked for my opinion, I was still struggling to understand the situation. Yet, I vaguely understood that an incredible stroke of luck had just knocked on my door.
Surely the fact that you saved the lives of my daughter and my infant is a factor. But I was truly moved by your story, John. In this day and age, it's rare to come across a young man with such fervor for learning. I don't want to overlook this joyous encounter. Would you allow me to take you under my wing?
There was no dishonesty detected in the professor's passionate speech. Joy slowly filled my entire being, and I was reduced to tears. Are you really okay with this?
Absolutely. But be warned, I'm tough, okay? Are you up for it?
I'll never forget the warmth of the professor's hand as he patted my back. I'd be honored, I shouted, wiping away the overflowing tears. Afterward, I passed the GED test and enrolled at the NYU where Professor Harris teaches. Incredibly, as the top performer in the test, I was granted a full scholarship under the university's special merit-based program. Thanks to the tutoring job that the professor introduced to me, my life has become stable and I've finally managed to give my mother a much-needed break. It felt dreamlike, given the miraculous sequence of events. Walking around campus in my white coat, I wonder if I'm shining brightly toward the future, just like the students I used to look up to.
Hey, Johnson, over here.
The one waving and shouting was Kathy, studying in the nursing department. There was one more unbelievable miracle. The high school girl who had lent a blanket to Ms. Mackenzie, inspired by that incident, chose to pursue a career in healthcare, and here we've bumped into each other again. As Kathy and I walk side by side, we discuss the future of healthcare. If you don't give up, opportunities will always come. I too aspire to be someone who can save lives, just like Professor Harris. I'm 35 years old, single, and just an ordinary company employee. No girlfriend, and certainly no plans for marriage. I have no desire to get married or high career aspirations. All I have is an appetite. While my colleagues are sprinting towards a bright future of getting married and advancing in their careers, I spend my days with no motivation. Even my colleagues in the same department never approach me for anything other than work. I handle my job competently, never arriving late or making mistakes. I don't aim for a perfect score, but I always maintain a passing grade. I never make an effort to communicate actively, so I've become a complete outsider. My only pleasure in my life is playing with my 3-year-old niece, Emma. I lost my father at an early age, and my mother passed away due to illness just a few years ago. Emma is the child of my sister, Rose, who's my only family. The moment Emma was born, I became a doting uncle. This weekend, I have plans to go to the zoo with Emma and Rose. I'm so excited that I can't help but feel jittery at work. While hiding my grinning face, I'm managing to get my work done until it's time to clock out. Suddenly, my phone rings. It's from an unknown number. Wondering who it could be, and I answer the phone. Surprisingly, it was from the police.
Sorry for the sudden call, this is the police. Are you related to Ms. Rose Wilson, specifically Mr. Jacob Wilson?
Yes. I found myself forgetting I was at the office and let out a loud yell. The officer on the phone told me that my sister and Emma had been in an accident and rushed to the hospital, and I was urgently requested to come to the hospital, and after giving me the hospital name and address, they hung up. I stood there, dazed and unable to grasp what was happening. But then, I felt my shoulder tapped by someone. Turning around, my immediate female boss stood there with a serious looking.
What happened?
I wanted to tell her that my sister and niece had been in an accident and were rushed to the hospital. But perhaps I was more shaken than I thought. I was at a loss for words and couldn't speak properly. I don't usually converse much with my female boss, which probably made me feel anxiety, and I ended up explaining with an unusually large amount of gesticulation.
Come down, I understood. Go to them now.
I thought I was maintaining my composure, but my heart was pounding so hard. Apologizing to my female boss and colleagues, I quickly gathered my things and rushed out of the office. Rose and Emma had been looking forward to going to the zoo. There's no way anything could go wrong. I repeated that to myself as I hurried to the hospital. But when I arrived, Rose was already gone. The driver, blinded by the setting sun, had missed a red light and hit Rose and Emma, who were crossing on the green light. Rose died instantly. It seemed that Emma was shielded by my sister at the last second, resulting in her getting away with just minor scratches. Overwhelmed by the shock of losing my only sibling, I found myself lost for words. However, there was no time to be swallowed by the sadness of my sister's death. There were so many things that needed to be done. I had to take it upon myself to contact relatives, arrange for my sister's funeral, and handle various other formalities.
Jacob, let's play.
I'm sorry, Emma. I've got some stuff to do. So after this, all right.
Okay.
Emma, still unable to understand her mother's death, was playing innocently. It was heartbreaking to see her like this. After the funeral, which was conducted without any issues, a family meeting was held to discuss the future. The topic of discussion was who will take care of Emma.
It's impossible for us.
We're already strapped for cash as it is.
As everyone hesitated and grappled with the idea of taking Heron, suddenly, all eyes were on me.
Jacob, you should take him in.
What? Caught off guard by the sudden proposal, my voice cracked. Sure, I'd played with Em a lot, but taking care of her is a completely different from playing. I wasn't even used to doing housework or cooking for myself, let alone raising a child. I didn't have an ounce of confidence in it.
Emma seems to like Jacob. I think it would be all right.
Yes, it would definitely be for the best.
Without even asking for my opinion, the conversation moved forward, and before I knew it, all the relatives had left. Without anyone to consult with, a new life began for me and Emma. I attempted to secure a spot in a daycare near my workplace during the morning period, but the lack of availability was disheartening. The daycare that Emma had been attending was too far from my house. Since I was going to be raising Emma, I needed to find a place within a reasonable distance from my home. But I was struggling to find a suitable daycare that I wasn't familiar with. And there was one more thing that was worrying me.
No.
Come on, Emma.
I absolutely refuse. I want to stay with you.
Emma, feeling vulnerable without her mother, had become extremely unstable. She couldn't bear to be separated from me even for a moment. Of course, it's understandable that she'd become emotionally unstable after suddenly losing her mother and being taken in by her unreliable uncle. But if this goes on like this, I wouldn't be able to go to work. In desperation, I called my female boss. I'm really sorry for the sudden request, but may I take a few days off? I've taken in my deceased sister's daughter and she just won't leave my side. Already having taken several days off for the funeral, I felt incredibly uncomfortable asking. However, my female boss replied,
Just come into the office. You can bring your niece along too.
I was truly sorry and apologized repeatedly over the phone. There must be a mountain of work waiting. Everyone must be working desperately to cover for me. The next day, I headed to the office with Emma. As I walked into the office with a nervous look, all eyes were instantly on me. I immediately apologized. I'm sorry for taking so many days off. As I bowed with Emma in my arms, the clacking of high heels drew nearer. It was undoubtedly my female boss. I was sure I was about to be scolded. As I timidly looked up, I was surprised to see my female boss with an extremely cheerful expression.
Welcome, what's your name? We've got some really yummy treats. Want to try some?
My name is Emma. I want to eat some treats, Tilda.
Emma, who had been clinging to me, quickly hopped down and started walking hand in hand with my female boss. That was the start of my colleagues crowding around Emma one after another. Seeing Emma, usually with a worried face, smiling like she was, filled me with relief. As my colleagues fussed over Emma, my female boss walked over to me.
You look as expected.
Huh? I didn't understand and asked her to repeat.
Your voice on the phone earlier, you sounded maxed out.
She said this and handed me a piece of paper. It was a parental leave request form. Seeing my surprised face, my female boss continued.
You must be having a tough time dealing with the procedures for daycare and adjusting to life with Emma. Take some parental leave and solidify your living situation for now.
Me, taking parental leave. It's true that our company has a parental leave system, but I never thought I'd be eligible.
Yes, and there's also this.
The next thing she handed me was a brochure for a daycare center. I remember that this is the one nearby here.
My daughter is in preschool, and she goes to this daycare. They're quite flexible, and they don't have too many events, so I highly recommend them. I'll check if they still have openings.
My female boss is a single mother. Even now, when her child suddenly falls ill, she often leaves work early. I remember her often taking time off when her child was in daycare and had a fever. As I thought about this, she gently patted my shoulder.
I really owe you one from those days.
Those days? I had no idea what she was talking about and tilted my head in confusion.
Don't you remember? Whenever my kid had a fever, you always covered my work.
Her words made the hazy memories at that time come flooding back. Back then, after returning from maternity leave, seeing her struggling with sudden calls from the daycare, I offered to help.
I thought you were so cool when you said, "Please assign all your work to me when you have to leave early." I almost fell for you,
She said with a hearty laugh. I felt oddly embarrassed. I had just offered to help because she was in trouble. At that time, my sister was pregnant. The father of her child had disappeared upon hearing about the pregnancy, but my sister had decided to become a mother despite the opposition from our mother and relatives. No matter how severe her morning sickness was or how heavy her body felt, she was always working part-time at a supermarket register to earn money for childbirth. Seeing my female boss struggling reminded me of my sister, and I couldn't help but offer to help.
Now it's my turn to help you.
But I don't really need.
First, take your parental leave. That will give you plenty of time, and then you can slowly take care of everything.
Are you sure that's okay? I couldn't believe the situation and asked her.
Of course, it's okay. And if you're having a hard time, you should consult with me sooner. Do you think I'm an unreliable boss?
When I hastily denied it, she smiled contentedly. I haven't done anything worth such praise. Honestly, I just helped out. Being thanked every time made me feel awkward, and I would often respond dismissively. Yet, I was genuinely happy to know she felt like that. I've always been averse to attracting attention and always tried to remain unnoticed at work. I'm not good with people, and I struggle with conversation. For the first time, I realized that there's someone who appreciates me so much, despite my shortcomings.
Jacob, look. I got a lot of candies.
I was pulled out of my reverie by Emma's voice. With a joyful grin, Emma ran towards me with holding full of sweets. That smile? This is the real Emma's smile. During our time of mourning, her smiles always seemed tinged with worry. Seeing her smile, so genuine and carefree, my eyes welled up.
If you really want to work, I can assign you some tasks that you can do at home during your parental leave. But right now, you should give the first priority to Emma. That's an order from your boss.
Yes, thank you so much. I replied, bowing my head energetically. I successfully took parental leave and slowly enjoyed my time at the daycare, the paperwork, and my time with Emma. Emma seemed to like the laid-back atmosphere of the daycare where my boss's child went. As for me, I decided to work flexibly, sometimes going into the office and sometimes working from home, always prioritizing Emma, who could be a bit unstable. I owe all this to my female boss and my colleagues. I'm still not great at communication, but there have been some changes recently.
Hey, Jacob, what's for dinner at your place tonight?
I'm thinking about making some seasoned rice.
Wow, you're good at making such elaborate dishes.
What are you talking about? I just add some rice seasoning and turn on the rice cooker.
I'm relieved to hear that. I have one of non-meetings today, so I'll be leaving an hour earlier.
Got it. I have mine the day after tomorrow, so don't forget please, okay? Like this, my female boss and I have had many opportunities to talk about time-saving housework and cooking. Despite being my boss, we are both single-parent, in a sense, comrades in arms. There's never a shortage of things to talk about when it comes to our kids. But that's not the only change.
Jacob, can you finish that work and still make it in time for pickup?
If I can't finish in time, I'll bring it home, so it's fine.
What do you mean it's fine? Give it to me. I'll do half.
My junior colleague snatched half of the files from my desk. I was taken aback for a moment, but I quickly opened my mouth. Thank you.
No problem.
My colleagues, who had seen me struggle to ask for help, started offering their assistance more frequently. It became commonplace for them to forcefully take work from me, even when I was clearly overwhelmed. I still find it incredibly awkward to express my gratitude. but when I say thank you, my colleagues always respond with a happy smile. I am able to do my work and live with Emma because of their support and help. It's all about mutual support. If it wasn't for this experience, I might have gone on without realizing such warmth of people. From now on, I want to give back what I received, protect Emma in place of my sister, and live on with determination.
Immediately after I was born, my mother passed away, and I was raised by my grandmother. My father, who deeply loved my mother, was unable to love me, who he believed had taken her life. I was a shy child with few friends, and I was often bullied at school. At family gatherings, I was often uncomfortably compared to my mother in her childhood. Listening to stories of my spirited mother, who always made those around her laugh, I felt guilty over being different from her and increasingly found myself unable to speak. Yet, my grandmother always embraced me with kindness. She'd say,
Amber, you have so many good qualities that are unique to you.
Her firm, cold hands, stroking my sobbing back, took away all my anxieties and sorrows. My grandmother always accepted me for who I was. The reason I applied to your company is because I resonate with your business philosophy. In a small, wooden apartment, I practice for interviews alone, speaking to my smartphone camera. With my university graduation looming, I'm the only one among my seminar peers and friends who hasn't received any job offers. I'm a post speaker with extreme stage fright, and I particularly struggle with situations like interviews. Even though I excel in exams and assignments, and sometimes help my peers with their studies, the fact that I haven't received any job offers has left my professors scratching their heads. Living alone on a scholarship and supporting myself with part-time jobs, I can't afford to take a gap year for job hunting. I had to secure a job by any means necessary. Knowing my circumstances, my peers, professors, and the career support staff gave me various advice and even helped me with interview practice. I stop the video and look at the notepad I prepared for the interview. In that notepad are the information of the companies I'll be interviewing with, my self-analysis, and the encouraging words from my professors and friends. Tomorrow, I have an interview with the only company where I've made it to the final round. For me, who has been consistently dropped at the first interview, this is an unparalleled opportunity. I start recording myself with my smartphone again. My strengths are... My words stall there.
Amber, your strength is that you listen to others sincerely.
My grandmother's voice echoes in my mind. No matter how many times I practice, I stumble and my voice shakes when I try to speak about my strengths. Sorry, Grandma. I mumble, stopping the recording. From the photograph displayed on the bookshelf, my grandmother looks down at me. My grandmother always told me that my strength was being able to care for people. And yet, I wasn't able to take good care of her. Right after I started university, my grandmother's condition started to deteriorate. She caused minor fires by forgetting about the stove at night and repeated the same stories over and over. She would call me by my mother's name and scold me harshly. She also caused a huge uproar involving all our relatives when she went shopping and didn't return for hours. When it was decided, with my aunt's encouragement, to place her in a nursing home, I felt a sense of relief deep inside. I was tired. For me, who had just started the campus life I had longed for after struggling to get into university, my grandmother, who had become a stranger with her harshness and bizarre behavior, was an annoying hindrance and a source of fear. With not so good relations with my relatives, I had no one to rely on and had to bear it all alone. That's why when my grandmother caused trouble, and it was revealed to my relatives that she had dementia and would be placed in a facility, I was relieved from the bottom of my heart. On the day my grandmother was admitted to the facility, my aunt, my grandmother, and I headed there together. My grandmother didn't start raging as I had feared, but instead hugged me gently with tears in her eyes and said,
"Thank you, Amber. Take care."
At that moment, I was hit with the realization that I was leaving the only person who had always been on my side in such a place. A few days after my grandmother entered the facility, she passed away. That sad smile on that day was the last I saw of my grandmother. On the day of the interview, I left home with plenty of time to spare. Because I left home quite early, I arrived at the venue more than an hour early. I should find a place to rest and calm my nerves. I began walking towards the diner where I had my first job interview. Suddenly, a scene caught my eye. This was in a downtown area on a weekday, with salespeople and others bustling about their outdoor work. Among the busy crowd, an old lady was hesitantly pacing back and forth in front of the crosswalk. I had an uneasy feeling and paused on my way to the diner to watch the old woman. Her anxious face reminded me of my grandmother on that day, and I couldn't take my eyes off her. A businessman engrossed in his phone walked right into her. The old lady fell in the middle of the crosswalk. "Watch out!" Before I knew it, I was running. I hurried over to help the old lady up. "Are you okay?" Supporting the old lady, I somehow managed to move her to the side of the road.
"I'm sorry, I got lost trying to go home,"
she said apologetically. "Really? Where do you live?" I asked as I pulled out my phone. I still had time and thought I might be able to help guide her. As I was about to input the address the old lady gave me into my phone, I stopped in surprise. "Arizona, you say?" "Yes, it is," the old lady replied with a smile.
"It seems I've gotten a bit confused after not seeing it for a while. I'm glad I met a kind soul."
Seeing the old lady smiling happily, I was taken aback. This was New York. As I was wondering what to do, I noticed a small piece of fabric sewn onto the old lady's clothes.
"Sorry for causing you trouble."
As I handed the old lady a warm cup of tea, she smiled apologetically. We were now sitting across from each other in the diner. We decided to wait for the old lady's pickup at the diner. I called the number sewn onto her clothes from my phone. The person who answered was a woman named Catherine. She apologized repeatedly in a weary voice, saying, "I'm so sorry for the trouble." I told Catherine where we were and that we had found a place to settle down, and that I would contact her again. Then, I hung up and arrived at the diner. It's close to many businesses, and I had plenty of time since I arrived early. I spread out my notepad that I prepared for the interview in front of the old lady. When I looked at the old lady, our eyes met. She asked with a worried look,
"Who are we waiting for now?"
I hesitated for a moment and then answered honestly, "Catherine." The old lady's eyes widened in surprise. "Catherine, is she coming here alone? I hope she doesn't get lost," she said worriedly. Then, she began to talk about Catherine. In her mind, Catherine was still a young girl who often got lost.
"Catherine is truly a kind-hearted girl, always being made to cry by her younger brother, James."
She talked about Catherine and her brother, James, sharing many stories. As I listened to the old lady's stories with a smile, I glanced at the clock in the diner. My interview was approaching. If I wait here, Catherine will come to pick her up. I should probably let the diner staff know the situation and start heading out. Just as I thought to get up, the old lady noticed and smiled at me.
"You're leaving, aren't you? Thank you, and take care."
Her lonely smile reminded me of my grandmother.
"Amber, thank you, and take care."
My grandmother's voice echoed in my mind, and I found myself once more settling into the hard bench I was about to leave. It's still okay. There's still more than 30 minutes left. As I assured her with a smile, saying, "I'm fine," the old lady beamed with relief.
"Hey, what are your parents like?"
The cheerful old lady, who had been chatting incessantly, turned to me with this sudden question. "My parents." As I hesitated, the old lady smiled kindly.
"Yes, the parents of a kind young lady like you. They must be wonderful people, right?"
I could feel my smile become strained at the old lady's words. She chuckled, saying hey, and looked at me with gentle eyes. Before I knew it, I was sharing a story I had never told anyone before with this complete stranger. My mom passed away shortly after I was born. My dad said he couldn't forgive me, who took my mother's life and left me to my maternal grandmother. I only know the two of them through pictures. I don't know much about my father, but I was often told by relatives that my mother was a bright and lovely woman. I resemble my mother in appearance, so everyone compared me to her. My grandmother took the place of my parents. She was really kind and accepted me for who I was, and raised me with love. But Granny, she gradually forgot about me. She began to think of me as her own daughter. Even though Granny was the only one who always saw me for who I was, Granny never compared me to my mom. Yet, she began to mistake me for my mother, called me by my mother's name, and I disappeared from her mind. Once I started talking, I couldn't stop, and I started to cry. A cold hand gently stroked my sobbing head.
There, you've had a hard time, haven't you?
I felt warmth spread from the spot where her hand had touched me, a comforting warmth slowly extending to the depths of my heart. Granny held me in the end. She called me by my name, and yet I abandoned Granny. I couldn't continue after that. As I continued to sob, Granny gently stroked my head.
It's okay, you're a lovely grandchild. The most important thing is for you to be happy. I'm sure your grandmother, and your mother too, would wish for nothing more than your happiness.
The old lady said gently as she stroked my hair.
Having a kind girl like you as a daughter or grandchild, they must have been so happy.
Facing the old lady, I kept crying. We must have stood out quite a bit because the expression on the face of Catherine, who came to pick us up, was quite shocked.
I'm sorry if my mother has caused any trouble for you.
I shook my head at Catherine, who kept bowing an apology. The old lady said, I knew Catherine couldn't do it. I'm sorry for causing trouble to the adult here, with a sigh. Catherine's face twisted in sadness. You know, Catherine, your grandmother just can't connect the Catherine in front of her with the Catherine in her memory. But I believe she truly loves you very much. Before I knew it, I was rambling. I knew it was none of my business, but I had to say it. I continued to relate to Catherine the stories I heard from the old lady about how much she loved Catherine. Catherine seemed shocked at first, but gradually her eyes welled up, and she started to cry with muffled sobs. I said goodbye to Catherine and the old lady, who kept thanking me, and I left diner. I was way past the time of my job interview. I took out my cell phone and called the company to apologize for not being able to make it to the interview. Then I headed straight for the train station to go home. When I got home, I started talking to my grandmother in the picture about the day I had and about my life up until now. I talked for hours on end, crying. I had never talked this much in my life, and the words just kept flowing out of me. There was so much I wanted to talk about. The next day, seeing my tear-stained face, my professor and friends looked very disappointed. When they heard my story, they were astounded, saying, "What a waste, and you should have just left it to the staff." But one of them said, "But it's so like you, Amber," and everyone began to agree, saying, "Indeed, and Amber is such a good listener, it makes you want to talk." With their words of encouragement, let's try again, I headed for the job placement office. The staff member, who had become very familiar to me, looked at me with a concerned expression. I don't think what I've done is a mistake. I have no regrets either. However, the fact that I had to redo my job hunting was depressing. I started my job search again. Good companies had already ended their recruitment, and I kept applying to promising companies among those left, but the results weren't very good as usual. Then one day, I received a call on my cell phone.
Sorry for the sudden call. Is this Amber Brown?
It was a call from a company where I couldn't have an interview the other day, and it was about conducting a re-interview. Feeling as if I was bewitched by a fox, I told my professor about this. My professor and my friends were happy for me as if it were their own, saying, "That's good. The opportunity has come around again." As soon as I got home, I reported this joy to my grandmother. I pulled myself together and started preparing for the interview again. On the day of the interview, when I told my name at the reception, the receptionist called the person in charge on the internal phone. As I was waiting for the person in charge in front of the reception, a woman came in after a while. Ha! Seeing the person who appeared, I was so surprised that my mouth was open. It was Catherine, who was dressed in a suit.
It's been a long time.
When Catherine bowed politely and started walking, saying, "Please come this way," I followed her, not knowing what was going on. As Catherine continued to move deeper into the company, she stopped in front of a heavy door. The plate says the president's office. When Catherine knocked on the door, there was an instruction to come in from inside, and I reluctantly stepped into the president's office.
Nice to meet you, Amber Brown. I'm Johnson, the president.
The person in the back of the splendid room was a man in his late 50s. He introduced himself briefly and laughed, saying, "My mother bothered you the other day."
My sister really wanted to meet you. You were going to have a home interview the day you helped my mother, weren't you? This is a family shame, so I decided to set up a re-interview.
Are you by any chance James? I, who had been listening to his words in astonishment, blurted out something off the mark out of nervousness. The president twisted his face and said, "That's right," with a puzzled face. "I'm sorry. I heard a lot of stories from your grandmother. She said you are rambunctious but really kind, smart, friend-loving, and proud son." I continued in a rush. There was something I had to convey no matter what. "I thought your grandmother was a very nice person when I talked to her. She's kind and caring, and she loves her family more than anyone else. She's a warm mother. It's not a shame. She's a really nice person." After saying so, I noticed the surprised face of the president and hurriedly bowed my head. The president was silent for a while as if thinking, but coughed once and said heavily, "Let's start the re-interview." A heavy atmosphere flowed in the room. I was nervous and felt cold sweat dripping all over my body. I didn't realize it until now, but the person in front of me is the president of a large company. He's not someone I should talk to casually. Suddenly brought back to reality, I answered the president's questions in a flustered manner. I was sweating on the palm of my hand. When the interview progressed to some extent, the president said, "That's enough. It's over." It was a great opportunity, but it wasn't good at all. When I was depressed, the president sighed heavily.
You're a very disadvantageous person. You waste opportunities for strangers, and when it comes to your own affairs, you suddenly become flustered. You're just at a loss.
Then, he put a notebook on the desk.
That's why you're loved by so many people.
That was the notepad I used during my job search. I don't know how I managed to lose it, but I wonder how it ended up here. As I was staring at the notepad, the president gave a wry smile.
This is what my sister received from a waitress who ran after you when you left the diner. I didn't really understand what you were trying to say earlier since you seemed so flustered. But by reading this, I can understand who you are.
The president signaled with his eyes, and Catherine opened the last page of the notepad and handed it to me.
Interviews are conducted to understand a person's character. I wasn't sure about your character based solely on this interview, but I have a good understanding of who you are. You're a sincere person who listens carefully to others and genuinely engages with their feelings. I would like such a person to work in our company.
While listening to the president's words, I couldn't take my eyes off the last page of the notepad. There, in a beautifully elegant handwriting that I didn't recognize, was written, "Thank you for listening to my story. I wish you happiness." Holding back tears that were about to overflow, I bowed and said, "I'm honored to serve." After that, I got a job in a company and worked in sales. My friends were surprised to hear that I, who am not good at talking, am in sales. But surprisingly, I found myself well suited for this job. I listen carefully to the customer's words and suggest the best plans. Although I'm still not good at speaking up, I'm living a fulfilling life with the help of those around me. I still occasionally visit that old lady's house and listen to her stories. The old lady sometimes mistakes me for Catherine, but her warm heart has saved me many times. Thank you, Grandma. Facing the old lady in front of me and my grandmother in heaven, I uttered words of gratitude.
Going home for the holidays. For some, it's a joyous occasion, while for others, it might be the gloomiest event of the year. For me, going home that year was a very depressing affair, but a certain event changed everything in an instant. One day, I marked a date on the August calendar and let out a small sigh. The summer holidays. It's time to travel with the family and visit family at home. My family has spent the last few years with just family, never going back to their respective parents' homes. But this year, we have plans to visit my in-laws. My wife definitely wanted to go home because it was the 1-year anniversary of her grandpa's death.
You look so down,
Lisa exclaimed, playfully tapping me on the back as I stood by the calendar. I was caught off guard and stumbled forward a bit. I frowned and shot her a glare, but Lisa just chuckled heartily. Despite her own reluctance to go home, yet she was able to laugh it off, which is something I respect. Once her laughter subsided, Lisa gave a small shrug.
I'm sorry, if you don't want to go, you don't have to.
She said, "No, I'd like to pay my respects to the man who cared for you," I replied. Hearing that, she gave a slight nod. From behind us, we could hear the sounds of our kids starting to bicker. Lisa turned around and hurriedly walked towards them. I watched her receding figure. Several years had passed since we got married. Both Lisa and I had initially visited our each home during the first couple of years, but recently, we hadn't even gone for Christmas. The reason is that my Phil and Bill dislike me. I don't remember doing anything to make them hate me. It is all because of my educational background. When I first met them before marrying Lisa, their attitude changed the moment they found out I am a high school degree. No matter how much Lisa tried to convince them, her father would just shout, telling her to break up with a man who only had a high school diploma. Lisa married me despite her father's opposition. From that point, it seems like her father started to despise me even more. I started working when I was 19. Soon after starting college, my mom fell ill. She had heart disease. My mom had divorced soon after giving birth to my younger bro and sis and lost touch with our dad. To support the three of us, she worked tirelessly day and night. Perhaps all that hard work took a toll on her health. She didn't have any relatives she could rely on. Though we had some savings, it wasn't enough to support my siblings. So, I started working part-time while still attending college. But that soon became too much, and I had to leave college and start working full-time. I was hired by a cleaning company. I worked hard as a janitor with the adults. My mom was very worried about my struggles as a high school graduate. Even though she must have been suffering from her treatment, she encouraged me, saying, "There must be someone watching you, so keep doing your best." Around that time, she grew thinner by the day. I wished she would worry about herself more. Even when we finally managed to stabilize our lives, she passed away when I was 20. After her passing, I continued working at the cleaning company to support my bro and sis. That's where I met Lisa. She was handling the office work for the cleaning company. Her parents owned a factory that had business dealings with our cleaning company, and she got the job through that connection. When I went to the headquarters for training, I got to know her due to a certain incident. We hit it off and started dating soon after. Back then, I was working hard for my mom, and Lisa became my rock. She was by my side, comforting me when my mother passed away, making her one of the people I owe the most in life. Later, we got married, and now, surrounded by our 2 kids, we live a happy life. Days flew by, and before we knew it, it was the middle of summer. When we stepped out of the air-conditioned car, the blazing sun hit our skin immediately. Picking up the hats our kids had tossed in the car, I followed Lisa as she headed for her parents' front door. Standing in front of the doorbell, Lisa adjusted our sleeping elder daughter, Mary, in her arms, took a deep breath. The fact that she has to feel so nervous in front of her own family home made me feel sorry for her. Knowing that I am the cause made my heart ache. Then, a small hand tugged at my sleeve.
"Daddy, stay strong."
It was our son, James. I understood that James, recalling how I comforted him when he fell and got hurt, was trying to cheer me up in the same way, which brought tears to my eyes. "Yeah, we're strong." I reassured, patting James on the head and looking into Lisa's eyes. With determination, she pressed the doorbell. The door opened, and Mimo squinted a bit as she looked at me.
"Oh, look, he's here. What a surprise,"
she remarked as she ushered us in. As we walked down the hallway, we almost bumped into the kids of my bill. James looked surprised and clung to me. For James, these are his cousins, but he doesn't know how to act as this is their first meeting. The cousins also looked at us with wide eyes, full of curiosity. Entering the living room, my Phil and Bill were seated.
"It's been a while."
"It's good to see you," I greeted them, but they just gave me a cold stare and a scoff.
"What does a high school graduate want here?"
You do realize you're in the house of a CO, right? Don't you think a family of cleaners would be out of place?
The Phil whispers, and the Bill joins in. I remembered hearing that Lisa's grandpa, Mr. Thompson, passed away and her father had taken over his factory. Most likely, the business would be passed down to the Bill next. Lisa confidently stepped forward.
"I'm just here to pay my respects to Grandpa,"
she said, heading towards the late grandpa's room. Holding James's hand, I followed her. My Phil snorted, deliberately looking away.
"Grandpa, look. Can you guess what this is?"
"Elephant. Well done."
From the corner of my eye, I could see James's cousins showing a sketchbook to their grandpa. I involuntarily tightened my grip on James's small hand. He's never had the chance to play with his grandpa. It pains me to think that I will not be able to give our children the experience to play with their grandpa like that, and I felt anger building up, wondering why we have to be treated this way. Back in the living room, my Mill offered us some tea. My Phil seemed like he didn't even want to look at us. "All right," he suddenly exclaimed, standing up. He took money out of his wallet.
"Here, buy him a toy with this."
"Yay."
Huh? Dad, you sure?
"It's okay. It's a reward for helping."
My Phil handed money to my Bill and then sat down as if nothing happened. He then raised his chin proudly and directed his gaze towards us.
"I don't have any pocket money to give to children of a man who only graduated from high school."
I bit my lip and glared at my Phil. James looked up at me with a troubled expression, perhaps aware that the comments were about him. I couldn't bear his attitude, not just towards me, but even towards the kids. The Bill sitting next to my Phil was also laughing with delight.
Lisa choosing a broke high school graduate like you is just silly. I can't see what she sees in you.
I felt disgusted at his dirty laugh. I stood up in anger. "Lisa, let's go. No need to stay a place like here any longer." She, possibly surprised by my rare outburst, momentarily looked stunned but then stood up to follow.
"A place like this. You should be thankful that we let a poor guy like you in home."
I heard his yelling voice from behind.
"How can you come in here so thick when you're just a high school graduate? Lisa got screwed over by a loser like you."
Ignoring his insults, I exited the house. As I headed to the car, another vehicle smoothly parked right in front of us. Not only were we surprised, but my still yelling Phil also went silent, clearly taken aback. And it's no wonder he was surprised. The vehicle was a luxury car. The window was open, revealing a slight view of the person inside. Seeing this, Lisa smirked a bit. She turned triumphantly towards her father.
"It's over, Dad."
At her words, he exclaimed, "What?"
"You married a poor guy like that. We don't need you. Just go home."
Just as he was yelling, The car door opened. The moment he saw the person stepping out, the color drained from his face. The man emerging from the car was dressed in a sharp suit. I was so shocked I couldn't help but drop my jaw. The Bill tilted his head, looking at the mysterious man.
Who's this? Some friend of the high school graduate.
Idiot, shut up.
The Phil hastily interrupted the Bill.
It's been a while, Mr. East.
The man from the car greeted with a friendly tone.
Oh, it has been, Mr. Hayes.
He greeted him with a flustered look.
Hayes, you mean?
The Bill's face turned pale instantly. Mr. Hayes smiled at Lisa and me.
Hello, Mr. Smith. Are you enjoying your holiday?
Thank you for asking, Mr. Hayes. What brings you here? This man is Mr. Hayes. He is the CEO of the cleaning company where Lisa and I work. He is also a major client of my Phil's factory.
I am old friends with Thompson. His first death anniversary is coming up. I want to pay my respects. I've informed a little while ago that I'd be coming over.
Yes, I did hear it. Please, make yourself comfortable at our place. We'll guide you to the gravesite shortly.
Suddenly humble, my Phil's invitation was quietly halted by Mr. Hayes raising his hand.
No, but I'm no longer in the mood. I'll pass, thank you.
At Mr. Hayes' words, my Phil began to wipe sweat from his pale face. It didn't seem like sweat from the heat.
Well, it's quite hot here, though.
It is indeed hot, but it looked like you all were quite rude to my benefactor. Frankly, I'm not eager to enter such a home.
Mr. Hayes was smiling, but there was an imposing aura around him. Even though I wasn't directly in front of him, I involuntarily straightened up.
I treated your benefactor poorly.
He seems utterly clueless. Mr. Hayes gently pointed towards me.
Your son-in-law Bob here saved my life. Years ago, he helped me when I had a heart attack.
My Phil turned pale almost instantly. Realizing I'd become the center of attention, I panicked. Well, I just happened to be there at the right time.
No, the paramedics said I would have been in grave danger had you not been there. You truly are my life savior.
What Mr. Hayes was talking about is right after I started working at the cleaning company. I was visiting the main office for training when I heard that Mr. Hayes had collapsed. The office was in chaos. I recognized his symptoms and immediately acted. I didn't have any medical expertise, so I just did basic first aid. My mom had heart problems, so I had learned as much as I could about them and even attended CPR and AED training sessions. Luckily, that knowledge was useful that day. The paramedics arrived soon after, and Mr. Hayes was rushed to the hospital. Later, he recovered completely. He was very grateful to me and still looks out for me, even though I'm just an ordinary employee. When my mom passed away, he was genuinely concerned for me. He still checks in on me from time to time. Mr. Hayes sighed softly.
My life savior and Mr. Thompson's granddaughter. I was so happy about the two of you getting married, just like you were my own kids. And yet...
Mr. Hayes' stern gaze turned to my Phil and Bill.
Have you ever tried to see the human essence? It seems you look down on him just because he didn't graduate college. But have you ever looked at Bob himself?
Well, that's because...
My Phil was waving his hands, trying to come up with an excuse. But he seemed lost for words. He just stuttered. My Bill was still in shock and unable to respond.
Bob is very dedicated to his work. He focuses on the small things and takes his job seriously. It seems you never tried to see that. I'm really disappointed.
With that, He turned on his heel and began to walk back to his luxury car. I quickly called out to him, "Mr. Hayes, we're about to visit Mr. Thompson's grave. Would you like to join us?" Mr. Hayes looked at me, his expression softening.
"Oh, I'd appreciate that. Thank you."
We got into our car, started the engine, and led the way, with Mr. Hayes following in his vehicle. Through the window, I could see my Phil and Bill left behind. Their appearance, stranded under the midsummer sun, was somewhat melancholy. In the back seat, Lisa, sitting with the kids, suddenly started laughing.
Well, that was refreshing. Mr. Hayes is so cool.
Really, that was something. I watched Mr. Hayes' car in the rearview mirror. When I reached the grave, I vowed to express my gratitude more formally. Months have passed since then. My FIL's factory seemed to have ceased its dealings with Mr. Hayes' company. Having lost their biggest client, I heard his business is struggling. I've secured a promotion at my job and things are going smoothly. I received an apology letter from my Phil and Bill, so it seems they've reflected on their actions. Suddenly, I recalled my mom's words, "You always have someone watching over and rooting for you." Turns out, that was true. I was a bit taken aback to realize that Mr. Hayes had been looking out for me. Though people say I saved a life, I didn't do anything special. I just provided first aid, and I'm normally just a janitor. Still, knowing that someone was there, watching and caring, made me truly happy. When I told this to Lisa, holding Mary, she teasingly laughed and said, "Oh, I'm right here watching you all the time and I get nothing." That's right. Lisa, James, and Mary are all watching over me. I have to keep pushing forward. Looking up at the sky, I hope that up there, my mother can see that we're all doing well,